eggs in the loot box basket. Gallagher, however, seems adamant about resisting this very plausible outcome. He responded to games industry's inquiry by stating, quote, "When you look at these other decisions, we can't go to the lowest common denominator of government around the world and make that the standard the rest of the world has to live by and limit the trajectory of the industry. That's not the best approach. Instead, we believe it's best to be clear about the facts and make sure those carry the day around the world, so we drive an outcome that best extends the games industry's frontiers and looks after the interests of gamers." Well, in retort, I say the world doesn't have to live by the shit standards the gaming industry wants to set, and the European Union, just as they did with GDPR, has all the authority to look at something based on consumer feedback, see it as unethical, and enforce regulation to mitigate its potential damage. Limiting the trajectory of the industry be damned. As for his statement on how he believes it's best to be clear about the facts to drive outcomes that are in the best interest of the games industry and gamers, that is seriously rich considering he promptly proceeds by spouting blatant lies, stating, quote, "In the US, loot boxes are not gambling for more than the reason I put here. The other one is it's not converted to value in the world. It can only exist in the digital world. That's the component that many of these definitions look at. There is not an exit path to turn that into something outside of the game." Bullshit. Games like Counter-Strike Global Offensive, PUBG, and FIFA 18, where paid randomized in-game rewards can be cashed out for up to thousands of dollars, beg to differ. If this is something that someone in Gallagher's position is unwilling to openly acknowledge, then he has lost the privilege to be clear about the facts. The only ones being clear right now are agencies from countries like Netherlands who did their research and presented valid arguments about games like the ones I previously mentioned that can be used as fronts for real-world gambling, where you can cash out. Now, this next bit really pisses me off. Gallagher added, quote, "We have both of those reasons present, predominantly for loot boxes and in-game transactions around this industry. So going to the one or two isolated overreactions, seeing how those overreactions play to one or two governments, and then making that the standard and doing that industry-wide, that's not going to be productive for the industry or for gamers." The fact that Gallagher is brushing off the backlash against loot boxes as one or two isolated overreactions should tell you just how little fucks he and other supporters of loot boxes give about consumers' feedback, and how little genuine effort he'll put into addressing the controversy. I should also remind you that it's not just one or two governments who are responding. The entire European Union is already in discussions, and we're seeing a ripple effect across other continents like Asia, where countries like South Korea are already looking into legally regulating loot boxes after discovering numerous companies using false advertisement to psychologically manipulate and lure people into making loot box purchases. Gallagher claims that government regulation won't be productive for the industry or for gamers, but with the kind of apathetic attitude that he and others like him are displaying, and given how clear it is that the gaming industry will do nothing, I would argue that it's the most productive thing that could happen at this point. Gallagher concluded with one last call to action, asserting, quote, "Let's inform first, continue to self-regulate, and move ahead that way. It's worked great for us over the last 20 years. That's the prescription we should use going forward. There is additional things we can do, and we'll look at those over the course of time. But it's only been since April that we have implemented the change. We should give it a chance and see how it plays out." I don't disagree that it would be great if the gaming industry could remain self-regulated, as it has worked well for a while. But once the loot box craze kicked in, once the gaming industry became unwilling to act in the best interest of consumers despite all the backlash, self-regulation suddenly became less viable. This rampant industry that thinks it can get away with anything needs some form of oversight, someone or something to keep them in check. At the very least, there needs to be a system in place to mitigate the potential harm loot boxes can cause, whether it's via age restrictions, disclosure of odds, or labels informing potential adverse effects on underdeveloped and developed minds alike. Alcohol and cigarettes are age restricted and can only be sold by vendors with the appropriate licenses. Casinos have have their own set of age restrictions, regulations, and license requirements. And even food has systems in place to ensure that everything's up to health code and that contents are fully disclosed in packaging. With loot boxes, on the other hand, it's open season. There is no system in place, nothing to keep game companies from exploiting the mechanism. So no, Gallagher, simply saying we'll look into it over the course of time is not enough, and we will not simply sit idly by and give it a chance and see how it plays out, especially when game companies are still insisting on pushing forward with loot boxes or calling backlash and feedback from consumers isolated overreactions. Gallagher can fuck right off with his willfully flawed logic, willfully erroneous facts, and willfully empty reassurances. I hope one gander at the crap spewing out of this guy's mouth will help you understand why I won't shut up about loot boxes. Some will say